Why is he the wrong person to piss off on your way up? Who was he?
He is incredibly powerful. He ended up being the president of the Salk Institute. Okay?
What does that mean to the average person that's listening to this?
He was, I think, the head of the national, he was certainly the editor of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. He was the editor-in-chief of the main oncology journal.
Okay.
He is, the way science is played in the United States is hardball, full-on hardball. Okay. And there are cabals, associations of scientists and their former postdocs, and they operate as units, okay? They are competitive units. And Inder was sitting at the top of an amazingly powerful stack, in large part because his mentor was David Baltimore, who got the Nobel Prize for reverse transcriptase, was seminal in setting up the regulations for recombinant DNA, former head of Caltech, left the Salk, went to MIT, ended up head of an institute at MIT before he went to Caltech, and there was a huge scandal around him in terms of his ethics. Inder was the postdoc that characterized reverse transcriptase for David Baltimore. Inder was, I think, a full professor at the age of 30. He was fast-tracked, incredibly powerful, controlled a very large amount of money.
Credible guy.
Credible. Science, for me, science is science. You know, whether you're powerful or I'm powerful or Tony Fauci is powerful, one of the things I love about it is it's an environment of ideas. And, you know, if I say something in a scientific forum and a young graduate student pops up in the audience and has a argument that demonstrates that my interpretation of the data is wrong, that person will be heard and I will change my opinion. That's the fundamental nature. That's why science has to have this dynamic tension.
I fully agree with you. We need that discourse and the debate because for me, the hardest thing for the average person you talk to is who do you trust?
So if you can flip back on your search engine and go to the next science article, bingo, Salk Institute professor. So that's not the science version. That's a San Diego version.
Resigns after investigation.
Yeah. So Inder had a long history of abuse.
Why'd you leave that article? Go back to that article. Resigns after investigation, go a little top, San Diego Union.
He's an incredibly powerful person, and this is typical of these super powerful scientists, is they can do no wrong because the indirect cost money that they generate supports their institute. In modern academia, these institutes and universities are supported by the indirect costs. At Harvard, for every dollar, if you get a federal grant or contract, for every dollar that you get to spend on your research, something like $1.10 goes to the university.
For every dollar
you get to spend, $1.10 goes to your dean in the university. Okay? So you're generating as a faculty member.
Yeah.
You're a major revenue source that supports the university. This is all built into the structure of NIH. Part of the NIH mission is to support American medical colleges.
So did he ever lose his license?
He's not an MD.
He's not an MD. Okay,
he's a PhD.
He's a PhD. So he resigns after investigation in what? Is it sexual allegations type of thing? Or?
Yeah, but it's only part of how he operated. He was incredibly powerful and grossly unethical.
Who respects him? Maybe tell me this, because you know a lot of times you will learn.
If you're editor-in-chief of Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences and the major oncology journal, everybody has to be nice to you. Inder did stuff routinely. Let me tell you a story. Okay, I'm a graduate student.
Okay,
and I spoke to a postdoc in the lab at the same time who had exactly the same experience. So I'm a graduate student. I'm working in this laboratory. I'm the only graduate student. It's an intensely competitive environment. The way he ran his lab is he would have multiple postdocs all assigned on the same topic, and they would compete with each other within the laboratory. Okay, so that's one strategy that these big scientists use. So when I was in the lab, Inder came to me with a stack of people's grant applications. These are supposed to be confidential. And he gave them to me, and he said, read these and get ideas. So I was shocked because this is
How old are you at that time?
27.
He said, read these and get ideas.
Right. Other people's grants.
Okay.
They're supposed to be confidential.
Now, let me ask you, is that a traditional exercise that many people were doing at that time, or that's illegal?
I don't know about anybody else, but that is grossly inappropriate and illegal, unethical, grossly unethical.
I asked that because I don't know your world.
Grants and grant proposals and contract proposals are supposed to be strictly confidential when they're sent out to the reviewers. And these days, the NIH will actually put you in jail if you do this. Okay?
So he asks you to look at these and come up with ideas.
To get ideas from other people's submission of
You're
their
27
proposals.
years old at the time.
Okay, so I go to the functional science head of the Salk Institute, and I say, this has happened. What am I supposed to do about this? And he said, maybe Inder isn't the best mentor for you.
Who said that to you?
I'm blanking on his name. It's not Tony Hunter. There was another lead scientist in the molecular biology and virology laboratories. Okay. So this is the environment where this kind of thing is tolerated. And in addition, in Inder's lab, there was this long history of sexual harassment by him, in the dark room with women, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually, it caught up with him, but for a long time, I'm told that the way the Salk handled this, because there were multiple claims, is that if you were a woman and you wanted to work in his laboratory, you felt like you needed to as a postdoc or whatever, you had to sign a disclaimer with the Salk Institute that you would not sue them if he did any of these actions to you. That's how it was handled.
Is that known? Is that known amongst people that work there?
Yes.
Okay. Now, who would you say were some of his allies? Names? Like, is he an ally with Fauci? Is he a friend of Fauci?
I don't know what his relationship is with Tony. His main power structure runs through the David Baltimore network.
Got it. Okay, so what was the falling out with the two of you? Was there a obvious falling out, or was it just like subtle, look, we're going to go our separate ways?
No, it was really, I ended up with a nervous breakdown over what happened. I had a formal diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder when I took my master's degree and left. I took a master's in lieu of a PhD. Okay, there was a cascade of events. And for me, you got to go back in time. I'm this cocky, arrogant, believe in myself, come out of this high pressure environment where I'm rigorously trained. I'm able to withstand scrutiny and go toe to toe with the best, and have been now, but I'm in my 20s. And so I own those character flaws and I compensate for them now. It's part of why I am the way I am, that I went through that transition. But I own what I was then. I would challenge anybody. I would challenge Inder. And
publicly or privately?
Both.
Okay.
Because that's the nature of science.
Sure.
Okay. Or I thought it was.
Sure.
To set the framework, I think there was 6 or 7 Nobel laureates at the Salk at the time, in addition to Jonas Salk. It was the pinnacle of molecular virology in the world, arguably. And I was working for the top gene therapy expert, retroviral gene therapy expert, which is what I wanted to make my career in. The laboratory when I was there included a guy named Dinko Valerio, who was pioneering a whole new technology for gene therapy using a recombinant DNA virus called adenovirus.
Okay.
Dinko left the lab, founded a company called Crucell. Because of my ideas, he came to me once and he said, after we'd both left the lab, I'm setting the stage, not bragging on myself, okay? This was a period of intense intellectual foment. I had come up with these ideas about using gene therapy technology for vaccines. Dinko created this company, Crucell, acquired this cell line called Percy-6, which is of fetal origin, tried to develop the platform for gene therapy purposes, and came to me at a conference a few years after we'd both left Inder's lab and said, Robert, you're right. The best application for this technology is for vaccines, and I'm going to change the focus of Crucell to become a vaccine company instead of a gene therapy company. Crucell was later sold for what was considered to be a huge amount of money at the time to a company called Johnson & Johnson. That is the technology that is in the J&J vaccine. That is why the J&J vaccine technology exists. It goes back to that same laboratory in that same time frame. It was an intense period of innovation. But Inder had this weakness. He talked about arrogant. A cascade of events happened that I've spoken about for hours and hours on other podcasts, and you can look on our website and you can see my wife's first-person accounting with all the documents, et cetera. So there's no reason to go over the cascade of things that happened that led to the inventions and the discoveries.
No, I'm more curious to know what was it a public falling out where afterwards he had a vendetta against you?
Just hear me out.
Yeah.
Okay. So I filed invention disclosures. Had Mark Kindy, the postdoc in the lab working next to me, cross-sign them for this stuff, and filed them with the Salk Institute. I'd been trained in what one had to do to protect intellectual property. Mm-hmm. Okay, so filed them with the Salk Institute. I had an interview with the Salk lawyers. They made a determination that I was the sole inventor. Meanwhile, the head of the Salk Institute, De Hoffman, who later died of AIDS from a blood transfusion, I think he worked on the Manhattan Project. He was a big shot lawyer. Okay, he was the head of the Salk Institute. The Salk had created an organization, I think it was called SIBIA, Salk Institute Biologic Associates, I think was the acronym. And it was intended to be their for-profit arm of their not-for-profit Salk Institute so that it would generate revenue so that they could become independent of the NIH for funding, or less dependent. Okay, so they were hoping that all this massive amount of intellectual property they were creating would go to this for-profit company, generate revenue so that the professors didn't have to write grants and contracts all the time. And so De Hoffman calls Inder in and calls me into the office on short notice and says, "What is this about you setting up a collaboration with Syntex?" Because Syntex had been the source of the cationic lipids consequent to Tony Hunter, another senior Salk faculty member. It's a brilliant mind, still there. Okay, Tony had advised me to get in touch with these people at Syntex to access this new emerging technology, I think because he'd reviewed the paper. It wasn't published yet. And he said, "Robert, you need to get in touch with Syntex to test their new lipid technology." That is what led to the fundamental final invention that enabled all of this. And I had set up a collaboration agreement with Inder's full knowledge with Syntex in order to get them to transfer these cationic lipids into the Salk so that I could use them as intellectual property and composition of matter transfer. De Hoffman heard about all this because he heard about the invention disclosure, and he called Inder in, and then I got called in. And I got asked what was the story, what happened here. And Inder was being attacked for having established this illicit collaboration with Syntex. And Inder denied knowing anything about it, said that I was a sole actor in this. He had no knowledge of this. He didn't know what I was doing. I had just done this independently. I was blown away. I thought in good faith I was coming into this really high-level person to disclose the chain of events. And in fact, what I hadn't realized is I was coming into an environment where Inder was being called on the carpet for doing something that was expressly forbidden by the new policy at the Salk because it would result in an intellectual entanglement, intellectual property entanglement with this for-profit company called Syntex in Palo Alto. And so Inder denied knowing anything about it. I was stunned. You know, remember, I'm not even 30 years old. I believe in science, right? And I've just encountered big science
for the first time,
good and hard.
Yeah.
Okay, not for the first time. I mean, I cut my teeth at the laboratory in Davis that made the first discovery of a retrovirus being involved in an immunodeficiency syndrome in primates.
No, I'm talking about you're coming across for the first time the manipulative side of science, like the power play.
Hardcore power play, okay? And so in this one I went to Tony Hunter, and I said, "Tony, Inder said this. I can't believe it." And he said to me, "Robert, of course Inder lied. What did you expect him to do?" And that was a you're no longer in Kansas moment for me. But
Is that how it ended?
no, Inder had, so then there became this whole long thread. I worked with the Salk lawyers. We wrote a patent based on what I had done and what I had disclosed.
Sure.
And the potential applications for it. And then there was a series of papers that made everybody realize that I'd stumbled onto something big. Was this serendipitous series of events where I was teaching teaching associate an embryology course where I was preparing embryos. We would call them frog, tadpoles,
Sure.
And chick embryos. And I decided to take the technology that I'd been working on and see if it would work in these whole animals. And it did, to my great surprise. And that was the tripwire that set this whole cascade in motion, because that was the origin of in vivo non-viral delivery. Everybody suddenly realized that this was a fundamental change. And the University of California and the professor at the University of California that was the professor teaching the embryology course that I was working under, her name's Christine Holt. She was a fellow still training, not a real faculty member. She insisted that she should be on the patent. She should be an inventor. Inder insisted that he should be an inventor, even though the Salk Institute said in their initial assessment that he wasn't a co-inventor, and he denied knowing anything about it to De Hoffman.
So long story short, just for the sake of time, because I got a lot of other things that I want to go through with you, is it fair to say that the whole dispute was over, here's a young guy that comes in, you stumble upon something that is absolutely ridiculous, that can help a lot of people out.
It's transformational.
And then everybody wants to take credit for it
and own it, because there's a potential huge,
which happens all the time.
Huge gold rush.
Which, by the way, that happens all the time. Not only where, the whole story with Tesla, not the car Tesla, but Tesla, Edison, that whole story, things like that. This has historically happened many times.
Yeah,
do you remember that one movie called The Genius? What is that one movie, Kai, where the guy creates the windshield wiper and Ford tries to sue him, and they say, we came up with it. It's a very good movie. Those types of stories are everywhere. So
I've experienced this kind of behavior all through my career.
So if you enjoyed this little short segment from the podcast that we did, here's another short segment to watch. Or if you want to see the entire podcast, click over here. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.